The leader of the free world, he's had a little bit of a senior moment, or we think it might be a senior moment. Let's take a look at this.
And so many of you know so much about this as well, and you're committed. And I want to thank all of you here for including bipartisan elected officials like Representative Governor, Senator Braun, Senator Booker, Representative Jackie. Are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here to help make this.
Where is she, Kinsey? Where's Jackie?
Mark, she's deceased, and she died on August 3rd. This is Congresswoman Jackie Walorski. She passed away in a car accident. This is horrible. Immediately after she passed away in the car accident, both Joe Biden and Jill Biden released a statement about what a wonderful woman she was and how they appreciated her contributions. Now, Joe Biden's press secretary was asked about this repeatedly after the incident, and she kept saying, oh, you have to understand Jackie was just on the top of his mind. And reporters said, but she is deceased, and he's acknowledged that she is deceased. How can you say she's just on the top of his mind? And she was like, well, I don't understand how you don't understand. I mean, it's just they're constantly trying to justify these gaffes that are, quite frankly, not only embarrassing to the country, but concerning when you think that this is the man that's in charge of the United States of America.
I'm afraid so. My producer, Cal, suggested we have a new item called Biden's Blunders, because here's another one. I mean, it's not quite a blunder, but it's a strange message to give to the American people during a hurricane. Take a look at this.
Let me be clear. If you're in a state where hurricanes often strike, like Florida or the Gulf Coast or into Texas, a vital part of preparing for hurricane season is to get vaccinated now. Everything is more complicated if you're not vaccinated in a hurricane.
But it's not a cult, is it? It's not a cult, Kinsey.
Well, I don't think that that's like the first thing you should be worried about when a hurricane's about to hit. I think you should get your dogs and cats in the car. But no, the Biden's blunders, I think that's your go-to, Mark. That's really going to put you on the map. Do it yesterday. Somebody deserves a raise.
Yeah, I mean, if there's another crisis, let's imagine that inflation goes beyond 10%. That's probably a good time to get vaccinated. If there's an earthquake, get vaccinated. If the Golden Gate Bridge collapses, get a needle in your arm.
That's right. It's the only answer here in the United States of America. And if you don't, then you're a terrorist. So, there's no in between.
Yes. And unpatriotic. Listen, it's a tragedy what's happening in states like Florida. Tell us about this awful hurricane, Hurricane Ian.
Yeah, Hurricane Ian is probably one of the worst storms that the United States has ever seen. There are 30 deaths so far, and it's crippling the state of Florida. And Ron DeSantis, who you and I talk about a lot on this show, did an incredible job of getting everybody out of the state of Florida. There are really just a few people that stayed behind, but in the midst of all of this chaos, Kamala Harris actually telling people recently that she was going to focus on the communities of color when it came to resources for victims of Ian. This crippling, I mean, I'm not kidding you, like this is devastating to the people of Florida because they hear that and they think, well, why am I not as important as my neighbor? The truth is this was just a gaffe. She shouldn't have said this. This was a mistake, a classic Biden administration mistake, slip of the tongue, I suppose. But I read this story and I thought this is why our country is so divided. And while it was a mistake to say communities of color and low-income communities were going to be the focus of how we help, how the country helps victims of Hurricane Ian, it's just, it creates this animosity between people because it's not like this was misinterpreted. This came out of her mouth. She said it and people quoted her as saying it. And it's just like, this is why the United States is so divided because of mistakes that are, that happen like this. This gets people talking. It gets people frustrated and upset.
And understandably so. That's a shocking remark to have made when people are in fear of their lives. I mean, do we know about the scale of threat to human life of these current storms, Kinsey? How bad are they?
I read that it was the fourth worst hurricane that the country has seen in quite some time. However, I mean, 30 lives. I'm very grateful that, you know, it's horrible. I'm sorry that we've lost 30, but 30 is a pretty low number.
Yes, indeed, mercifully, although, of course, there are 30 tragedies. But, you know, the economic impact will be massive, too. A big state like Florida, a big financial headache as well, businesses and the economy.
But Ron DeSantis is an incredible governor, and he's already prepared. He's been ahead of all of this, you know, telling people to leave so far ahead of when previous states, other states have done so. And he saved a lot of lives by getting in front of this hurricane. And he's actually begged people not to make this a political issue. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, get in your car and get out of Dodge. So I think he's a really good leader, and I do think that people are looking at him throughout this process, not to make it political, for 2024.
Unfortunately, I don't have a vote, but I think he would be an incredible president, given his leadership in the course of the pandemic and not caving to the science. Kinsey, let me ask you about a new series on Netflix called Monster, a Jeffrey Dahmer story. Who was Jeffrey Dahmer and what did he do?
Oh my goodness. Jeffrey Dahmer was a serial killer that we had in the 90s. In the 80s and the 90s, he killed 17 men, primarily African American and primarily gay. He's being played by Evan Peters in the new Netflix series. Now, this series has broke major records for Netflix as the most watching them. They talk about waking up and receiving a ton of text messages. Also, them recreating some of their most traumatic experiences inside the courtroom in the show.
Yes, it raises an ethical question about whether there should be, TV dramas, movies about serial killers when the families of victims are still alive.
I completely agree. I did not think that this one was necessary. And then in casting Evan Peters, who I don't know if you're familiar with him, he's a very handsome and charismatic actor.
X-Men.
Ryan Murphy loves him. Yes, Ryan Murphy loves him. He's in all of the American Horror Story series, and he always plays this likable killer or this likable bad guy. And so there is a lot of debate about casting somebody so handsome and charming to play somebody that was just so disgusting and horrible.
Indeed, pretty troubling stuff, but the opposite to have you for the last 10 minutes, Kinsey, and I can't wait to see you in a week's time. Our heart goes out to everybody in Florida and the surrounding regions during Hurricane Ian, and we'll catch up in a week's time.
Thanks, Mark. Talk to you soon.